So in today's video, I'm talking about how negative thoughts and assumptions can ruin your relationships. So in this video, I'm going to go over some really common negative thoughts that most of us struggle with and how to prevent those thoughts from ruining your relationships. But first, if you're new, my name's Michelle Ferris. I'm a psychotherapist and I help people create relationships that work. So our thoughts create our feelings, which in turn creates our behavior. So it's really important to catch our thoughts because that dictates everything else. And negative thoughts tend to cloud everything, and I don't want that for you. So the first negative thought I want you to pay attention to that ruin relationships is, here we go again. I've heard this many times in my couples work. And the assumption being made is that we're going to talk about the same thing, or the same thing is going to keep happening over and over again. We're not giving our partner or the other person the benefit of the doubt because we hear one or two sentences and we immediately go, oh, we're going to go into that subject again. Whatever it is, it's a negative assumption that makes it harder for us to communicate effectively and to actually listen to the other person. Because here we go again, assumes that we know what the other person is going to say when really we don't. So your new action is to listen without assuming what you think the other person means. So really what you can do is just check out your assumption. Is this what you're talking about? Give the other person the benefit of the doubt. Don't assume what the other person is thinking. So the next negative thought or assumption that ruin relationships is, I don't deserve to be happy. This is key because if you don't deserve to be happy and have loving, mutually satisfying relationships, you're actually going to assume the worst, like you're never going to have a healthy relationship. You're never going to be able to have what other people have and be happy. That's a negative belief that often starts in childhood, where you don't have a lot of hope for the future, or you don't really feel good enough about yourself to attract somebody healthy and create a lasting relationship. Ironically, these kind of negative thoughts become a habit, which end up creating our reality. So for instance, when I didn't feel good about myself, I didn't look for healthy people because I didn't know what they were. Instead, I stayed with people who weren't necessarily healthy for me because I didn't think I deserved better. I didn't think I could ever be with somebody who was really healthy. So that belief governed my behavior. Because when we think we deserve less, that's the reality we create. So your new action is asking yourself, what if it's okay that you're happy? Start exploring that. Like, what's wrong with letting yourself have more? I want you to challenge that belief because you do deserve to be happy and have the kind of relationships you want, but you have to believe it first. If you've ever struggled with this, say me too in the comments, you're not alone. Another negative thought and assumption that ruin relationships is saying, I don't know. And this one is interesting because in counseling, a lot of times we're exploring deeper issues. We're exploring why you might be feeling depressed or anxious. And sometimes that why question can be important. For instance, I had a client recently, and often he said, I don't know. And what I notice when people say that is it kind of stops the conversation from going any deeper. When I say I don't know, I have to really challenge that because sometimes it's because I don't want to dig any deeper, or I'm not really giving it a lot of deep thought. So I'm just saying I don't know why this is happening. And it actually removes us from taking responsibility for naming what the problem actually is. Because sometimes it's important to dig deeper and understand why you're feeling unhappy or why you can't set boundaries. Because there's always a reason or a story behind that. And so it's really important sometimes when you find yourself saying, I don't know, that's a really good time to do some journaling and really find out what is going on with you in terms of a particular issue. So the new action is, what if you did know what was wrong? What's really getting in the way for you right now? Because that is where the solution is. Another common negative thought and assumption that ruin relationships is, nobody understands me. I've heard this one too. And the problem with this one is that it's a very black and white statement. It's nobody on the planet, right? We tend to talk in extremes. And while you may feel like you're misunderstood at times, I know I have, I also have to remind myself, who does understand me? Because most of the time we need to challenge ourselves to say, okay, who does support you? Because if we focus on nobody understands us, What happens is that we just tend to not trust people, and we tend to feel a lot more alone, and we don't want to socialize or reach out because we're just making the assumption that nobody's going to get who we are anyway, and that's a really painful place to be. If you've ever felt that way, say me too in the comments. You're not alone. So your new action here is to focus on who does understand you and cultivate those relationships, because it's very rare that somebody will come back with me and say they don't have anyone in their life. Now, if that's you and you truly don't have anyone in your life, then I want you to consider joining a support group or getting some therapy, because you absolutely need to be understood in this life so that you can heal, move forward, and create the life you want. Another common negative thought and assumption that ruin relationships is thinking life isn't fair, because this belief makes everything feel more difficult, because we automatically assume that we're not going to get what we want. Maybe everybody else is going to get what they want. They're going to be happy. They're going to get the promotion. They're going to get the relationship we've always wanted, but we're not, because life isn't fair. And often this goes back to childhood, where we may have heard that from our parents. And you may have grown up in that kind of environment where life wasn't fair, or things will never go your way. And while it's true that sometimes life isn't fair, making that a blanket statement is dangerous, because it's going to make your life that much harder, and I don't want that for you. So in recovery, it's really about recognizing that sometimes life isn't fair, but sometimes life goes our way and things are good, and we need to embrace that versus only embracing that negative thought. So your new action is to accept the fact that while sometimes life isn't fair, always focusing on that ends up creating that as your new reality, and I don't want that for you. I want you to be able to say, yeah, life isn't fair sometimes, but not all the time, because that is where you can build some hope. So the next negative thought or assumption that ruins relationships is that people can't be trusted. This is a huge one, because again, if you don't trust anybody to be there for you, then it's going to be really hard to create healthy relationships. And while not all people are trustworthy, I absolutely agree with that, there are a lot of people who are. And to cultivate those relationships with people that are safe, their words and their actions match, those are the people that are trustworthy, because they show up, they're reliable, and they're honest. Those are the people we want to cultivate relationships with. But if we have a belief that nobody can be trusted, we're not going to find those people, because we're going to assume they're not there. This is when we may get into the same relationship with somebody we don't trust again and again and again, because we don't really have the experience of what true trust feels like. So what I want you to do is I want you to write down who in your life is trustworthy. Who can you depend on? Who feels safest to you? Those are the people you want to cultivate relationships with. But you have to be able to change that belief first. So your new action is to cultivate those relationships with people that do feel safe, that do show up for you, that are honest. Those are the people I want you to hang out with. And I also want you to start getting better at picking the red flags. And that's the video I'm going to have you watch this week, because knowing who not to trust is important too. Now, the next negative belief and assumption that ruin relationships is this statement: if only my partner, child, friend, fill in the blank, would change, everything would be fine. Now, the problem with this negative thought is that you are assuming that your life would get better if only this other person would change. You don't have to do anything different. And this is super common, where we think, gosh, if only my husband would stop drinking. If only my friend was more respectful. If only, right? The problem with that is that people don't typically change unless they have their own motivation. So our work is to change ourselves so that we can create healthy relationships and have better boundaries and learn to detach from toxic behavior to keep ourselves safe. So your new action item is, what changes can you make in your relationships today so that you don't get dependent on other people changing? Because when I sit down and go, okay, what do I need to change in myself? That's when I feel the most powerful in my recovery, because that creates positive change in my relationship. And that's what I want for you. Now, the next step I want you to do is I want you to go watch my video on red flags in relationships, because that's your next step. Thanks so much.